Without Tom Ford, we may not know two of the biggest fashion brands as we do today. He was responsible for the revival and resurrection of both Gucci and Saint Laurent, as well as creating his own eponymous brand, eventually selling for billions. But how did a small-town American country boy go on to disrupt the world of fashion? Thomas Carlyle Ford was born on the 27th of August 1961 in Austin, Texas. He grew up in a happy home with both of his parents, who were realtors. Aged 11, they later moved to New Mexico, where he stayed to finish school. Ford was destined for a creative career. He took an early interest in art and painting. He would arrange the furniture in the house and give his mother feedback on her hair and shoes. His parents encouraged him to do anything. If I wanted art lessons, they found paint and a teacher, he said. His two early role models in fashion were his mother and grandmother. My mother was very chic, very classic, he recalls. My paternal grandmother was very stylish in a very Texas way. Everything was big and flashy, from her jewelry to her car. Alongside fashion, he also had a passion for film. He'd visit the local theatre to watch classic Hollywood films up until 1979, where he moved to New York City to study art history at NYU. Whilst living in New York, he was introduced to Studio 54 nightclub. Here, he became a regular, and he realised he was gay. After just 1 year of studying in 1980, he dropped out and moved to LA, where he went on to focus on acting in TV commercials. At one point, he was featured in 12 national advertising campaigns at once. However, after a few years, he moved back to New York, and this time he enrolled at Parsons School of Design, where he chose to study interior architecture, and he was able to return to spending his nights at Studio 54. The club's disco glamour aesthetic would become a major influence on his later designs. The following year, he transferred to Paris campus at Parsons and did a placement year in industry, where he became an intern at Chloe's press office. This inspired his interest in fashion, and in turn, he switched to study fashion during his final year at Parsons, saying he just woke up one morning and thought, "What am I doing?" Architecture was just way too serious, and that every architectural project he ever did, he somehow worked a dress into it. In 1986, he graduated with his degree in architecture, but was determined for a job in fashion. He would say he went to Parsons, but hid the fact he studied architecture, and he'd label his internship at Chloe as a low-level PR position. Ford was persistent when looking for a job. He wanted to work for Cathy Hardwick, a prominent sportswear designer, so he called her office every single day for a month straight. In hopes of stopping these annoying calls her assistant was getting, Hardwick herself answered the phone. She asked Ford when he would be free to meet, and he walked straight into her office 2 minutes later. It turns out he'd been calling her from the lobby every day. Looking back, Hardwick said, "I had every intention of giving him no hope. I asked him who his favourite European designers were, and he said Armani and Chanel. Months later, I asked him why he said that, and he said, because you were wearing something Armani." His determination paid off, and Ford worked as a design assistant for Hardwick for 2 years. And around the same time, in 1986, he met his future partner, Richard Buckley, a menswear fashion journalist. Just 2 years later, in 1988, Ford went to work as a jeans designer at Perry Ellis, where he knew Marc Jacobs, who was also designing there at the time as well. Although Ford loved fashion, he became bored and tired of American fashion. He commented that if he was ever going to become a good designer, he had to leave the US. "Too much style in America is tacky," he said. It was the late 80s at this point, and being a gay man then was quite a sad time for Tom and Richard because of the spread of AIDS, a time referred to as the gay plague, due to the lack of treatments available and number of fatalities. It caused a change in the atmosphere of the community. Less people were going out, and more people felt ashamed of being gay. Yet another reason why Ford wanted to leave America. Meanwhile, over in Italy, the once dominating luxury fashion house Gucci was struggling financially. Dawn Mello, then the creative director, said, "No one would dream of wearing Gucci. The house needed a complete brand overhaul, and they started looking for a new face to strengthen their women's ready-to-wear. A difficult role to fill, and most didn't want the job," Mello said, but Tom Ford did. Mello understood that for an American designer to move over to Italy for a brand on the brink of failure was risky, so he must have been determined to make it work. Ford was offered the job, and in September 1990, he and his long-term partner Richard Buckley relocated to Milan. His success is one for the history books. We still refer now to Tom Ford's iconic era at Gucci and how he single-handedly rebuilt the brand. When Ford arrived at the house, there was a lot of infighting. After all, it was a family-run company, notably a scandalous tabloid family too, but we'll save that for another in-depth video. Ford started designing for the women's wear. Within 6 months, also menswear, and not long after that, footwear as well. By 1992, he was heading the brand's ready-to-wear, fragrances, image, advertising, and store design. During the early years at Gucci, Ford was often overshadowed and almost fired multiple times by Maurizio Gucci, the chairman and 50% owner. He preferred to keep his designers anonymous, and it was even written in their contracts that designers could not step out onto the runway after the show. The two had creative differences. Mello, the creative director at the time, explained, "Maurizio always wanted everything to be round and brown, and Tom wanted it to be square and black." However, Ford's talent and commitment prevailed. By 1993, he was designing 11 product lines and working 18-hour days. During the same year, Maurizio sold his shares in the company to an investment firm, Investcorp. From this point, the Gucci family were no longer involved in the running of the brand, a timeline that is slightly convoluted in the House of Gucci film. Domenico De Sole, the CEO of Gucci, appointed Tom Ford as the creative director of the brand in 1994 at just age 32. It's no surprise that he quickly transformed the fashion house with his signature style. He championed all-out sexiness, putting risque silhouettes and suggestive fabrics center stage. He was inspired by Halston's work and created velvet hipsters and satin shirts. He showcased sensual white dresses with daring cutouts, sleek suits, a range of boots, bags, and even G-strings. These contemporary ideas shifted the direction of Italian fashion. His first collection as creative director was fall 1995, and he was able to design whatever he wanted. He recalls being very proud of what he did, and with no Maurizio in his way, he was finally able to step out onto the runway and be applauded for his work. In 1995, at a time when fashion campaigns were outdated, Ford reimagined them with a more controversial and provocative approach. He worked with iconic photographer Mario Testino and French stylist Karine Roitfield to create new, genuinely unforgettable campaign imagery that oozed sex appeal. The most famous and controversial Gucci ad of all time came in 2003. Ford was widely criticised for such provocative images in his ad campaigns, many of which were labelled as vulgar, sexist, or objectifying women. And in response, Ford stated he is an equal opportunity objectifier and is just as happy to objectify men, which he did try. However, when he did a male nude ad later in his career at YSL, it was banned. He also faced a New York Times story alleging prominent fashion photographers sexually exploited male models at his shoot. While he was not present for the photo shoot, Ford said he was sympathetic to those who'd been wrongfully sexually harassed. The thing is, sex sells, and Ford, he sold a lot. When he originally became creative director, the brand's finances were in hot water. Maurizio had splurged on the company's headquarters and over-licensed the brand, costing them to lose over $22 million in just 1993. In 1994, they took the company public in a bid to avoid the takeover by LVMH. Ford and De Sole joined forces with Pinault Printemps Redoux, PPR, now known as Kering, who bought a controlling stake of 42% for $3 billion. Together, they quickly turned the brand around, with sales spiking revenues of over $500 million in 1995. A few years later, in 1999, the Gucci Group acquired Yves Saint Laurent from Kering, who had purchased it in 1994. They hoped for a similar success at YSL and therefore placed Ford, the creative director of Gucci, as also the creative director of Yves Saint Laurent as well, igniting one of the most legendary feuds in fashion history. Ford started designing the ready-to-wear line, overseeing 16 collections a year, whilst Yves, the eponym, stuck to haute couture. The pair were friendly at the beginning. Yves was very complimentary of Ford's work at Gucci and showed up to support his first show at YSL. They even had dinner together a few times. Ford's designs had started to bring Yves Saint Laurent back into the mainstream. He continued his tactic of controversial and provocative campaigns to advertise Yves Saint Laurent fragrances, and he also placed women in more revealing clothes and making them sexier. This was much to the dismay of eponymous designer who shared his displeasure with Vogue. saying Ford does what he can. Ford explained this tension saying, "Our business was doubling and doubling and doubling, and when I started to get great press and the business started to become very successful, Eve became really quite hostile. Eve even sent hate mail to Ford." In one handwritten note, he expressed his offence saying, "In 13 minutes on the runway, you have destroyed 40 years of my career." Although Ford has been so successful, he'd managed to revitalise the brand and increase business dramatically. Nowadays, he's forgotten most of his awful time at the house. Yves and his partner Pierre Berger were so difficult and so evil, they made my life such misery, Tom said. They would call the police to his offices if they suspected staff had worked more than 35 hours a week, where he was then risked of being shut down or fined. Under Ford, the Gucci Group also acquired Sergio Rossi in 1998, then Bottega Veneta and Balenciaga in 2001. In 2004, Kering raised their stake in the group to 99.4%, taking controlling interest. It was after this complete acquisition that Tom Ford resigned from both Gucci and Yves Saint Laurent. He spoke on the situation as devastating, deeply upsetting, and the cause of his midlife crisis. He had put everything into that for 15 years, but had to leave due to creative differences between him and the new owners. A year later, in 2005, Tom Ford founded his own fashion company, Tom Ford. Domenico De Soleil, who Ford worked with previously, also joined the brand as chairman. He announced his partnership with the Marsolin Group to produce and distribute optical frames and sunglasses, as well as an alliance with Estée Lauder to create the Tom Ford beauty brand. In order to create a buzz for his new brand, he posed on the cover of Vanity Fair's March 2006 issue wearing his Tom Ford brand's menswear. The cover, in Tom Ford style, inevitably created a conversation and a significant buzz around the brand. This was thanks to, obviously, his provocative nature, where he was sandwiched between Keira Knightley and Scarlett Johansson, who both posed nude. In 2007, he opened up his first directly owned flagship store in New York, which coincided with the debut of Tom Ford menswear and accessory collection. A few years later, in 2010, he expanded into the high-end glamour of womenswear that he was best known for. Ford described the Tom Ford customer as an international and cultured man with disposable income, and strong and intelligent women who know their style. His designs have been worn by the creme de la creme, former First Lady Michelle Obama, Beyoncé, J-Lo, Gaga, Hugh Jackman, Johnny Depp, and Daniel Craig. His suits are actually the James Bond suits. As a menswear designer, Ford explained there is nothing better than dressing James Bond. Meanwhile, his iconic luxury beauty brand carries a highly differentiated collection of fragrance, makeup, and skincare, crafted with the ultimate quality and glamour in mind. What started with a luxury fragrance has since grown into one of the most successful and aspirational beauty brands in the world. The perfume bottles are now a recognizable icon in the industry, and the scents are beautiful. Ella put a poll in this in the Luxe Circle the other day, which is, by the way, is where we have all our daily conversations with you guys in our community about all things luxury fashion. Anyway, we asked you if you agreed with us that Tom Ford fragrances are the best. And actually, it seems like you don't agree with that. If you want to join in the conversation next time, just subscribe to see our posts. Back in 2005, Ford had chosen to focus on his filmmaking aspirations. He signed with CAA talent agent Byron Lord and started his own production company, Fade to Black Productions. A year later, in 2006, he bought the rights to Christopher Isherwood's novel, A Single Man, and a script written by David Scarce. Ford rewrote this 15 times, and the writing process is actually his favourite part. It's the most fun, and in the moment, in your imagination, it's perfect, he said. A very different reality to when you're actually working simultaneously with cameras, actors, lighting, music, and feeling. It gets more complicated. Ford had no experience. His need for creative control caused disagreements with his screenwriter, and he couldn't obtain finance from studios because he was a first-time filmmaker. The production budget was $7 million, and going against all advice from Hollywood, Ford decided to pay it on his own. 3 years later, in 2009, his first film was released, A Single Man. A story following the life of an English teacher who falls into depression and contemplates ending his own life after the passing of his longtime partner. The film premiered at the 66th Annual Venice International Film Festival and went on to be nominated for many awards. Looking back at his life so far, Ford said, "Making A Single Man is probably the single thing I'm most proud of because it was so incredibly personal." Tom Ford has won many awards during his life. 5 CFDA awards, the first one being in 1995, 4 Vogue Fashion Awards, and many more. He has released 2 eponymous monographs covering his career, 1990 to 2021, the first released in 2004, a book we see on many modern coffee tables, and the second being released in 2021. In 2013, Ford was mentioned in Justin Timberlake's song Suit and Tie, and Jay-Z also titled the song Tom Ford. He was very pleased, saying, "Who would not be flattered to have an entire tack named after them?" It's pretty rare that something like this happens. It's a kind of validation of one's work. In 2014, Tom married his longtime partner, Richard Buckley. The couple had been together for 28 years, and they have a son named Jack, who was born in 2012 via a surrogate. They also have 2 smooth fox terriers called Angus and India, who even starred in his first film and his runways. In 2015, Ford produced his second film, Nocturnal Animals, based on the 1933 novel Tony and Susan by Austin Wright. Although he was willing to cover the $22.5 million budget again in order to maintain creative control, Focus Features production company offered him $20 million, full control and ad approval, a deal he could not refuse, and an ode to his legitimacy as a filmmaker. The movie premiered at the 73rd International Venice Film Festival, and like the first, this too went on to be nominated for many awards. In November 2022, the Tom Ford brand was purchased by Estee Lauder for $2.8 billion. Then, in April 2023, with the release of the next season, Tom Ford suddenly announced that he was stepping down as the creative director of his brand with little fanfare. He dropped his final collection not on a runway, but rather in the form of 3 short videos. They featured his favourite pieces from the past 13 years, including a remake of his Spring 2020 fuchsia breastplate and skirt ensemble, the Fall 2012 white-caped gown Gwyneth Paltrow wore to the Oscars, and a metallic bodycon dress from the Spring 2016 collection. They will be reissued in the Archive Autumn-Winter 2023 collection. His successor at Tom Ford was named Peter Hawkins, a long-time menswear designer at the brand, who also worked closely with Tom during his tenure at Gucci. Ford's next steps are unknown. Is this the end of his career in fashion, or is he taking his talents to another house? Back in a November 2021 interview with a Hollywood Reporter, he said, "I wish I had the time to make more films, but somehow I created this big business." Maybe he's going to pursue his passion for film, and we'll be seeing him on the big screen, well, director's chair sometime soon. Or is maybe this really the end of his working life and the start of his retirement? Unfortunately, in September 2021, his partner Richard passed away following a long illness as a result of cancer. With the sale of his company making Tom $1 billion richer, maybe he wants to spend some more time with his son and grieving the loss of his partner. But let's be honest, it would be surprising never to see Ford in the limelight again. And given the drive he's had for his 40-year career, it's unlikely to be the case. Nonetheless, no matter what comes next in Ford's life, he has already demonstrated immense aptitude across a range of creative roles, redefining the realm of fashion, completely rejuvenating 2 fashion houses, and revolutionizing branding. His boldness and ability to create designs synonymous with opulence, glamour, and sensuality has solidified his legacy as a designer that's influenced contemporary culture. If his successor can follow his lead, his namesake label could last at least another lifetime. We'll keep you all updated on his next steps, so make sure you keep an eye out and join in on our daily conversations. Let me know in the comment section who you want to see us cover next, but if you like your fashion history and you want to know more, check out this video because it is so interesting.